Everybody else's mic works. My name is Daniel Webster. I work for a company called Kaltura, but really it's about the people on the panel. The last session was about the impact of OTT on pay TV, and this is really about monetization of OTT platforms, over-the-top platforms, for those people who aren't familiar with all the crazy acronyms which are going around. And I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves and say what they consider the sort of biggest issue around monetization. But first, let's put this in the context of the news which came out this morning. And as everybody who's read a blog or a news feed or something knows that Verizon acquired AOL for $4.4 billion. And that's very interesting and ironic, and it's a show of the times. And it really sort of goes to the heart of what we're talking about. The media landscape is dramatically changing. All the players are being shaken up, and you're having talks of cord cutting, cord nevers, whether or not that's right, is something which we're going to sort of discuss, and also what the economics are of these new models. It's interesting that when the merger between AOL and Time Warner happened back 15 years ago, that was for, I think, 182 billion was the valuation of the two companies. So you can sort of see that there is money being essentially sucked out of the ecosystem. And the question which everybody is facing, more so this year than any previous year, is where those new sustainable monetization models come from. And everybody is sort of experimenting and sort of being forced to play with that. There are some folks like the ABCs of this world who still get a lot of money from the traditional form of distribution, to the tune of $8 billion in terms of their ESPN rights alone. And the question is, as those models begin to sort of fracture, as you have this unbundling and rebundling, what are those new monetization models going to look like? And will companies that are sitting here in this room be able to sort of survive in this new sort of economic system? So with that as a sort of big contextual overview, I'm going to go down the line and have everybody introduce themselves. And again, please sort of state what you think is the big issue that needs to be solved, and then we'll get into the real set of questions. Jeremy.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Landis, founder of Kincaid. We're a software experience and design firm. We do a lot of development in the TV and media space. Some of our clients are Comcast, Showtime, and in the OTT space, Gaiam. In a past life, I actually was at Comcast in the early days, whenever the internet side was about 12 of us, and it was in Comcast.net days and the fan and early streaming. So long history in this realm and seeing OTT coming for a long time. I think that one of the biggest challenges we're going to have in OTT space overall, and what will drive monetization, the winners will be the ones that give the best overall user experience. And that's going to touch a lot of places. That's going to touch the interface. It's going to touch the streaming and delivery service. But it's also going to be ads and some other things that we'll touch on today. But I think it's the user experience that's really going to drive it.
Great. My name is Doug Parrish. I'm the president of RR Media. We're a global media services company, mostly focused on broadcast, channel origination, content preparation services, and kind of the front end of a lot of the things that we see in the online environment. Former life, I ran Ascent Media Group, Move Networks, and was the CTO of the Walt Disney Company, responsible for digital new media and the internet business. And so I've done both the traditional and the new media side of this equation. My perspective is there's a whole lot of things that need to be solved, but for purposes of at least a preamble, one of the things I think needs to be taken care of is what I would call the gravity or friction around rights and how all those things happen. To me, it's a physics problem. You have to have a certain amount of friction or we wouldn't be able to even walk around or things like that. But we can't have so much friction that we have our shoes stuck to the floor, and so we need to figure those kinds of things out. We'll touch a little bit more on that later.
I'm Scott Rosenberg. I lead the New York office for Roku, and I run our ad business. I also write lots of content deals, distribution deals for our platform. My team and I are focused on something that I think is one of the more interesting issues facing OTT, opportunities facing OTT. Our job is to help content providers like David's company get audience and then monetize that audience. We're in the second or third phase of the OTT evolution. It's increasingly becoming a scale game. Can you help a publisher acquire critical mass audience? Can you equip them with the tools to monetize effectively, whether that's marketing, subscriptions, or transactions, or ad-supported views? So that's our focus on my team, and I think very much the most interesting area in OTT right now.
I'm David Fannin. I'm the Executive Vice President of Screen Media Ventures. We launched a VOD ad-supported movie platform called Popcorn Flicks in 2011. When the demise of the DVD started, we looked to the OTT space as the new frontier, and I think we were correct about that. But the biggest difficulty we're facing right now is that the ad model is not caught up with the use today. So right now, advertisers are still not gravitating towards OTT as much as I'd like them to be. So that's what we're focusing on. I think Scott is helping in that area and what Roku's doing, and I think that's kind of the new frontier for that.
So David, let's pick up on that, and this applies to the whole panel. Ad monetization models, AVOD, SVOD, subscription, TVOD, transactional, hybrid. As was said on the previous panel, Glenn Beck, 300 to 400 subscribers in an advertising universe, that would never work. It wouldn't work in a cable broadcast or a cable universe. How is this going to sort of play out, and how does this become sustainable? And then you've got the MCNs on the other sort of side of the equation.
Well, I don't think we got to see how it's going to play out. I think there's always going to be space for free content, and that's why the ad model will work. The SVOD model, you see, what I find is really interesting in the space I'm in, every other week there's a new announcement of someone doing an SVOD model, which I'm happy about. I'm like, please go ahead, take the SVOD model. I want the AVOD model right now. So I think it'll become oversaturated. I mean, what's HBO now charging? $19? That's a significant amount of money for this platform. You've got Netflix, you'll have Showtime. They're all going to be charging. And I think when ESPN gets in there, I don't even know what they're going to charge. So the free model is always going to be available. I think the SVOD model may become oversaturated at some point, and it'll become less and less. But Glenn Beck fans are always going to be Glenn Beck fans, and they're going to pay top dollar for that. So if you nail that niche audience that you need, the SVOD model will work for that, as long as you don't expect to be everything to everybody.
And do you think that you'll be able to get the numbers that it requires to drive, at least in historical revenue sort of equations around an advertising model?
Well, right now the numbers are significant, and the last report I've read that we haven't even hit 30% of households having some kind of OTT device in. So I think in 2 years, when you start having 200 million with OTT devices, and there's going to be 3 or 4 in a house, I think that is going to support the model. I mean, it's unbelievable what the growth is. It's like the Wild West right now.
Okay, Scott, you've done a phenomenal job of getting Roku in practically everywhere and building out sort of channels. But as you sort of look at this monetization sort of problem, how do you achieve that in what is essentially a medium where people can jump from one sort of experience to another and aren't used to being sort of captive and having this sort of interruptive model that we all sort of grew up with?
Well, I don't think they're jumping from device to device. When we get a Roku user, we generally keep them and we sell a second and third device into them. I think, we are headed into a world where there are thousands of channels for a user. Another zero on top of or 2 zeros on top of the channel count you could get through your MVPD. I think the physics are changing too. I mean, David was talking about these smaller SVOD services. These guys don't need to do millions of subscribers for their business model to work, right? The costs of distribution, the content that they're licensing, many of them would be very happy, very successful with tens or low hundreds of thousands of subscribers. And on a platform like ours, that's tenable, right? The cost, the infrastructure necessary to deploy that, support that. In the old world, you'd have to go try and strike affiliate deals with every major cable operator. On the ad-supported segment, I agree with David. It's if you sort of think of the OTT in waves of business models, sort of the first wave was the Netflix, large aggregator SVOD business model. Then we had Amazon and Hulu come in behind that, and then transactional services have been a big growth category for us. The ad-supported segment is basically the youngest. I consider it to be the youngest of the segments in terms of its maturity in OTT. The model is different. I think a lot of publishers are still trying to build the scale necessary to run a direct sales team. Some of the plumbing that they would need to sell successfully is not there yet. We announced last week a deal with Nielsen to enable digital ad ratings on Roku. It's the first OTT platform to solve that problem, and that's part of an investment we're making as a platform to try and make for better monetization. We've also integrated interactive ad tech into our core platform. We did a partnership with Innovid to enable that. So we're working at the platform level to try and help ad-supported business models sell better. So there's scale, there's capability, and then there's market awareness. I mean, I think the marketers of today, the agencies, are waking up to the importance of following the cord cutter, the cord shaver, the cord neverer. And those numbers for the first time in the last few quarters are showing up as very real declines in subscriptions to pay TV services, double-digit declines in ratings across most networks. So you have a growing but still early stage awareness among marketers that they've got to follow viewers into the connected TV world.
So you deal a lot with the content prep and putting the metadata around that and making sure that the rights are being sort of handled effectively. As you look at it from your sort of perspective of going from the big sort of broadcasty MSO world to a much more sort of agile IP world, I mean, are we ready for that? You've heard all the nightmares of performance problems, and you're essentially going from a broadcast to a unicast model. You know more about the infrastructure than most people. Are we going to be successful there?
Well, I think all of these things are evolving in a variety of ways. And we talk about the different models, AVOD, SVOD, TVOD, free-to-air, all of those things. I mean, my perspective is those are all going to exist and exist simultaneously. The problem we're going to run into is there's going to be a certain amount of force that's required. People are going to object, if you may, to an enormous number of SVOD services. I mean, you pay $19 for HBO. As Scott pointed out, ESPN or Netflix and all of these other things. Pretty soon you look at your credit card bill at the end of the month and you go, I can't afford all these things. And so I think there's going to be roles for aggregators to deal with those kinds of issues and subscription bundling, especially for the lower value channels and things like that. There's no doubt about the fact that somebody will say, look, I've got this set of things that I would like to watch that are my particular interests, and I'm willing to pay the premium subscriptions for that because there'll be a bunch of value add things that go along with that, access to premium content or events or things like that that you normally wouldn't have access to if you were a not premium frequent flyer. Let's use that as an example. So I think that there's issues there around how all of those different pieces come together. And I think the second part that's related to that is really around the devices and the technology and how all that comes together. I'm a big believer of the fact that the regular mainstream viewer isn't going to be interested in having multiple set-top boxes connected up to a screen in some way. It's confusing, unless you go out and deliberately program your home for those kinds of things. Yes, those things exist, but most people have 14 different remote controls, and they're trying to figure all of these things out. And so, we need to figure also out how to deliver a service that is something that people are used to. That's one of the things they like about a single set-top box and a cable platform and things like that is, the user interface, in some cases badly formed, but we all know who those guys are, and in others they're done fairly well, and people are used to those kind of guides. So I think those are issues that have to be solved as much as the issue of, is it all going to be subscription, transactional, or ad-based?
So that's a great transition to Jeremy, because ultimately it's about the consumer experience, the UX, but let me sort of twist this slightly. We have customers who have SVOD, AVOD, TVOD, things all within the same user experience. And having a user experience which sort of adapts to what your particular sort of value proposition is that the way to go, or do you need to sort of create a really simplified Netflix-like one subscription kind of thing, and another straightforward ad thing, or can they coexist?
That's a big question. Yeah, so a couple things. I think in the world of OTT aggregators, one of the things you might see happen in ads is as people start to aggregate, then you don't worry about, like cable is today, you don't worry about that this channel only has X amount of subscribers. You can start to sell ads across that aggregated network of channels. Yeah, to your question, we've been doing a lot of work and doing a lot of research around what is the best experience. So there's Apple TV and OTT, where all the apps look the same, the navigation's the same, it's forced down one route. The content goes in, and whether you're in the FX or HBO or UFC or any other app, you know how to navigate it, and it's the same. Versus a Roku or Fire TV, where you have complete control over your app. So if I want to go in and watch something in HBO, my experience is completely different than going in and watching something on Gaiam and going in and watching something on FX. So I think that there's a lot of consumer confusion there about how to, what application they're in and how to access the content that they're getting to. So if you look at something like Sling TV and starting to create a service where you're aggregating all this content and all these channels into one thing, you start to create that opportunity. Cable's always had that opportunity. They've had varying degrees of success on actually executing the user experience around accessing all this content, being able to browse and find. And you're seeing some of those barriers come down. It used to be that on-demand menus were extremely segmented, and it was all based on the marketing team said that this channel couldn't be beside this channel, beside this. So you'd go to movies and it'd be all over the place. They're starting to aggregate that, so you go to one place and you can see movies and see it across these different places. So to your question about can all these things coexist, I think that yes, they can coexist and they will coexist, and there's going to be clear paths inside of each of these services whenever you're in either a Sling, which is aggregating a bunch of different channels and content, and maybe that or another service starts to enforce their own UI guidelines to make it simpler, or you're going to HBO Now because that's a premium service that's separate. And I think both will exist in this future world.
I think one of the most exciting things in the OTT space right now, just to piggyback on Jeremy's comment, is programmers are becoming programmers. Mm-hmm. And by that I mean software developers. Sounds very Yogi Berra-esque, I suppose. But I mean, I think that we interact with thousands of publishers, programmers, app developers, whatever term you want to use, and they're all at various stages of recognition that they're in the software development UX space. Some sort of just don't want to accept it and don't want to acknowledge that it has a profound impact on their ability to keep, and grow their audience. And some of them are all the way on the other end of the spectrum, like a Netflix, very sophisticated, A/B testing how they present content and organize their experience, constantly optimizing. And I'm not suggesting that every programmer will end up at that far end of the spectrum or necessarily needs to, but there's definitely a new discipline emerging in the space where a programmer has the opportunity to go right to that last piece of glass and provide a unique and branded experience to the user. And those who do that well and think about that and recognize that that's a core part of their business will have a better chance of winning than those who don't.
Yeah, I think what Scott's saying too, in terms of programmers becoming programmers, I mean, some of the highest paid network executives, over time were the programming guys, the people who would set up Thursday night lineup and say, here's what we're going to have in terms of the different content. So from my perspective, channels still matter in some way. And it's not just a user experience, but it's also content that gets threaded together in terms of what follows on. For those of you who do binge watching, it's very easy to say, well, gee, what should follow episode 3 of season 3 of House of Cards should be episode 4. That's a no-brainer. But to be able to take the diverse library and universe of content and figure out what gets stitched behind all of these and create, personalized virtual channels and things like that. And it's not all going to be artificial intelligence and software. There's going to be, human thought that goes into that and figure those things out.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with all of it. It's funny, Scott and I were just talking about what we need to do to update our app. And to follow up on that point is, we're programmers, and for example, I started this platform with about 1,000 movies. We had a film library that we could start. And to get into this space without owning content is very difficult. But now I've got to get the user experience, and how is the user going to watch it? It's important to have a flow of movies, but it's also technologically important to be able to have the consumer to get that flow delivered directly to them seamlessly. You're watching this, the next one's got to pop right up. I mean, if you want to get the binge watcher, you got to make it easy for them. And that's where the technology side fits in. It's a really interesting marriage. And, for an old programming A&E television networks guy, it's every day is a new challenge of what we're doing and looking at numbers and where does this fit in the slider? What's going to follow this? How are my consumers going to reach this? Who likes this? And, it changes from day to day what people are watching. So it's... I wish I had all the answers. I just don't right now.
So is it so we've got the sort of top-down approach, old programming, we think we know what people want to sort of watch kind of mentality, and then we've got the programmatic, bottoms-up sort of algorithms driving personalization, recommendations.
But I believe there's room for both. I really do.
too.
It's funny. I always say consumers, to a lot of us and TV watchers, are somewhat lazy. I want to turn something on and just watch something.
Yeah.
I come home at night, I don't want to think. I don't want to go through a list. I don't want to try to pick what I'm going to choose. I sometimes wouldn't mind. So I think the linear version of, and I think that's the next kind of thing to develop in the OTT space, is to have a linear channel where something is just playing. Now, it can be ad supported or not, but I just don't have to choose it. I can flip on Popcorn Flicks and I can just watch a movie. And I'll catch it in the middle. It doesn't matter. Kids are yelling, I just hide right now and just watch something.
And as you think about your ad model specifically, do you think there's ever the opportunity to use an ad model more as a sort of freemium upsell to a sustainable subscription model? You've watched, you're learning about that user, they've watched, X number of on that.
It's funny, we have an argument about this all the time.
That's why
Is there going to be, does the consumer say, you know what, fine, you'll charge me this, but it's free. It's hard to compete with free, I think. Mm-hmm. And, I would like to kind of develop that further. And we've done some experiments with Roku where we charge a consumer, you can watch it 99 cents without ads or with ads. And that's lukewarm. I think at the end of the day, a consumer sees free.
Lukewarm meaning the vast majority take the ad
Take the free.
rather
take the free.
than fund the 99 cents.
Fund the 99 cents.
Yeah.
I mean, it's surprisingly still people do it, but again, it's free. I think will always win out.
Okay.
When they're side by side. Now, I think if Netflix started with a free model and a subscription model, it would be kind of different. Yeah, I don't know if their subscription model would be the same today. I just think I can't have Popcorn Flicks charging and the free one. I think people will always revert to the free one. Now I can start a new channel. It's a little different and order something differently. I believe that's there.
Yeah,
And again, I haven't done this yet, so I'm really just,
I guess I'm sort of sitting here wondering if that's reflective of your content and who your audience is, and if you could have multiple audiences, and for instance, a young audience that gets an advertising stream because they have lots of time and not much money versus somebody paying for convenience or particular sort of fan base in the sort of Glenn Beck model, and whether or not, again, coming back to the question, can those be supported within a single system?
Yeah, I think too that it's also predicated on the content itself. You know, I mean, we've all had the experience of the two things I'm going to describe. First of all is of content that's had all the ads compressed out, and you get to that interesting crescendo where it fades to black, and then it immediately goes to another scene, and you were kind of expecting an ad to be inserted there as kind of a breather for you to kind of contemplate what that particular act of the show was. And we've also had the inverse, which is a show that goes to a place where then an ad's suddenly there, and you go, where did this come from? Because the storyline didn't include that. And so one of the things I believe happens over time is that the content adapts itself to this, or the story writers and the content creators figure out how to deal with that. And I think, you know, to your point about these different models, you know, content that doesn't have these normal breaks put into it will be more likely to appear in a lot of these SVOD kinds of places, and the AVOD, you know, there'll be content designed for those things as well.
Let me shift slightly here. I mean, I saw an interesting graphic actually last night, which sort of showed the evolution of, in this case, Fox television network from an OVP play, sorry again for the acronyms, online video platform, to an OTT play, to now more of a sort of personalized TV play, if you want. You know, do you think that that is, and this applies to everybody, the sort of natural progression as you go from online ad supporting to OTT, which tend to be more transactional and subscription, to building in of technology which has more personalization and recommendation, or are there other sort of evolutions? I mean, if people here are trying to sort of figure out how to spin up their own OTT things and make it actually sustainable, and I know at least a few people in the audience who are, what would be your advice in sort of, what's the evolution? What would they have to do today in order to do that? And I'll start with, you know, is it around A/B testing and experimentation? What is it? Jeremy?
Yeah, so, is my mic on? Sorry, just thinking. Yeah, so I think that if someone were starting out right now, I don't know that it's an all the things you mentioned to me are one thing, like whether it's, you know, the video platform powers the OTT solution, and knowing the different components. So there's the user experience component, there's the content component, there's a platform component. And I mean, all those things feed into the user experience. So whenever I click start, how does it go? We were also talking a lot about ads, and to touch on that a little bit more from previous, you know, part of the problem with ads online is it's just largely ineffective, right? You see the same ad over and over several times. You see, you know, I think there's some ad abuse with some injections going in. Like, I was watching The Comedians, the new Billy Crystal show, and in between the intro and the first scene, they injected a commercial. And it just feels like it's a little bit too much, like it's being forced instead of feeling like a natural flow, like you were mentioning. There's this thing, and I need a break, and I get an ad, and that's my expectation as a consumer. So, you know, going back to, you know, what you need to do right is you need to know what type of company you are. Are you a technology company? This talks a little bit to the programmers as well. So if you are a content company, and I'll kind of frame this in, we do work with Guy TV that does OTT, and it's all health and wellness content. And they've done a great job where they knew who they were, and they were a content company. So they've always outsourced their vendor and their platforms, their ads. They do all those things, and they focus on the content. And they started with what they thought was going to be a small fan club of a couple hundred people. It ended up being a couple thousand people, up to 100,000 people. And you know, they've done a really good job just focusing on what they need to do. So the experience piece, they've outsourced us, thankfully. The platform that's underneath is powering all the video, and they're really focused. So whenever you go back to programmers, the issue that I see is people can't do everything well. So they need to know what it is they need to do well for their company to be a success. And as a video provider, content provider, you know, it's really the content. And then looking at what partners can help you get to the consumer and give you the best pieces and the best experience to deliver that.
Yeah, sometimes the best decision is to outsource something, right? But you have to start by recognizing, hey, the user experience is important. I need somebody like Jeremy's company to help me with that. We work with the Gaiam team quite a bit, and they're pretty innovative in terms of thinking about not just the user experience, but how to market. I mean, that's another competency for the next generation programmers. How do you market in this new ecosystem? You used to just market it by piggybacking one show on top of the show in the hour prior. The competency, the tools you use, the metrics you look at are quite different and evolving quickly. And so the Gaiam team's pretty innovative in that regard.
Yeah. I think marketing is a critical aspect that media companies need to actually take a lesson out of what a lot of marketing companies have known for a long time. Yeah. Doug?
Well, I think the question really revolves around advice, and I think what has to happen is people have to look at this from a very holistic perspective. I don't think that any one of these models are necessarily going to supplant the other. We still have free TV today. We've got cable subscriptions and all of this online and over-the-top things that are happening. But for companies who are already flying broadcast channels today, there's an opportunity to turn those into to online channels. There's an opportunity to cross-market on all of these different spaces. A good example of this is back in 2006 when we launched abc.com, which was all of the catch-up episodes at that point in time. And I remember sitting down with the programming executives and saying, look, what we want is this 15-second call out at the end of, let's see, Lost was one of the big episodic programs at that time. We want a 15-second call out at the end of Lost, and we were told to get lost. Sorry for the bad joke, but we were told to go away because they weren't going to use that 15 seconds of possible promotional or advertising airtime in order to promote somebody back to go to an online experience. Now, admittedly, that's 8 years ago, but I think all of these pieces exist, and they need to be moving viewers from one to the other, especially because we already talk a lot about this not being just 10-foot experience sitting on the sofa, but I've got this that I'm watching in the train or the subway or wherever, and so those are different experiences as well. They should all drive me back to a variety of other things.
David?
Well, it's funny, you spoke about early on about the flow from the web. I mean, we started with a web-based property, and when we first started in 2011, you couldn't get video ads on the web. It was all banner advertisement, and we were started there. And then, now everybody's used to watching video ads on the web. I mean, now I look at a news feed, and it starts with a video ad every time. And, 3 years ago, people were saying, no one's going to watch ads on the web. And now that's where we're at. Now we're at OTT. We're trying to go to what's going to happen there with the advertising, and I think Scott's right on it. What Roku's doing with Nielsen is it's really going to change the whole landscape of what's happening there. And we're working on new technology right now from the mobile phone. Now my mobile phone is going to become a remote control. I've got a technology that we're developing right now. I will have it on my phone, and you're watching popcorn flicks. You're going to go into your house, and it'll say, you have a Roku device. Would you like to watch this on the Roku device? And if Popcorn Flicks isn't even downloaded on the Roku device, it will ask me if I want to download it on the Roku device. So then it's become a mobile-based property, and everything's coming from our phones. Mm-hmm. It's, where we're going the next 2 years, the advice to say to what people are going to do for this space, I'm not sure how to direct anybody. Because it's changing so rapidly.
So 30 seconds very quickly, for this audience, what's the sort of big takeaway for each of you, and then we'll sort of throw it open for some questions. So if there are any questions out there, get them ready. Jeremy.
So I think takeaway for this year, I think we're going to see maybe by end of year and the next year, 5 to 10 major aggregators following the lines of Sling, starting to aggregate, microphone keeps on coming on and off, sorry. Starting to aggregate this content and offer it in dynamic bundling so that you're only paying for the channels that you want. And whenever, I think the big movement's going to be that reduction of friction. And one of our favorite examples of that is actually the Amazon Fire TV whenever it first came out. And I took the stick and I plugged it in, and it knew who I was and gave me all my content without ever logging in. That type of friction reduction is what consumers are going to expect, because right now, Comcast gives them a box and they turn it on and it starts playing, and that's what they see. But I think so. These aggregators, and the goal of reducing that friction of I don't have to log into FX, log into HBO, and deal with the Showtime TV Everywhere experience. I log in one place and I get access to the content I want.
Frictionless TV?
I think it's content, so it'll continue to evolve as the technology enables it. The way I describe it is like this, the first mass medium really was print and newspaper, particularly when radio was available. The first radio programs were guys reading the newspaper on the radio. And then radio evolved into content that was fitted for that technology and format. And then the first television programs were what? Radio melodramas on television. You could see the Foley artists in the back doing their sound effects and everything else. And then television evolved to embrace, the capability, the full capability of its medium. We've seen this before, and what we're at right now, I think, is in a place where the content's going to evolve to embrace these different platforms. We're just in that weird pubescent stage right now. Scott?
I agree with Jeremy. I think that bundling and virtual pay TV services are going to be a big trend over the next couple of years. I think this initiatives like the Sling TV strategy, we'll see more of those. And I think they're really changing the way consumers think about TV and the way programmers think about what bundling they want to be part of. And I think we're going to see a real maturation of the ad-supported segment in OTT over the next year or two.
Natural segue to you, Dave.
Yeah, no, and I agree with both. It's funny, I read an article today about Dish, that they've lost 135,000 subscribers, but they're not giving the numbers on what Sling TV is doing, and they're devoting more and more of their resources to Sling TV. I think aggregation is going to be key, and I think the overall key is that we're going to see more and more people go to the OTT, whether it's Amazon Fire, Roku. They're going to leave cable behind, and cable's going to be fine because they have the pipe into the home for the most part, so you don't have to worry about them. But I think that's going to be the big takeaway. I mean, right now, what did I say? It's about 3 in 10 have an OTT device. I think that'll be at 50% by the end of the year, and I think it's going to move much faster than other things have in the past. And I think in 2 years, this is really going to be a mature business.
Yeah. That one point about cable companies are going to be okay is so critical compared to Dish. I mean, when we talk about cord cutters, they're not cutting the cord.
No.
They got broadband into the home. It's just you're seeing pay TV evolving to.
And then the concern will be, just to throw that out there for people to think about, is who's going to control that pipe and how much they're going to charge for that and get it net neutrality, and that's going to be a real interesting.
That's another panel.
Yeah.
So, do we have any questions? And I'll repeat them so the microphones pick them up.
So Jeremy mentioned Sling first. I think Charlie Ergen knew he was going to cannibalize his own consumers when he did that. Do you think that programmers and those of us who create content need to just start making friends with the Slings of the world? Because I do think you're right on. People want one bill to pay. They want one source to go to. So do we visit Scott and talk about...
I was with you right until you said you only want one bill. I mean, 2 or 3 maybe.
Or do we go visit someone at Sling?
And where are
So
you
let me
from?
just repeat the question. So with Dish TV being very disruptive, not only to the industry, but to their own sort of fundamental business, what is a content owner to do? Where do they go to basically get their content distributed to end users? Does it have to be a one-stop shop, or is there another way that this is going to play out and work?
I think bundling is only headed in one direction, which is more diversity, more price points, more choice.
Right.
And depending on the kind of programmer you are, the urgency for you to start working those deals is different. But if you're serving a demo that's younger, and observing double-digit ratings drops, you ought to be thinking about it faster than programmers whose audiences are moving more slowly.
Can I add to that too? I think that you do that already today. You're visiting all of the major distributors as a channel operator and saying, I need to be on Dish, I need to be on DirecTV, I need to be on Verizon, I need to be on all of the cable platforms. The reason we don't have an enormous choice today is mostly because those cable plants are public utilities and regulated in some fashion so that everybody isn't digging up the street all the time. Now I think we're just going to see more and more of these guys emerge, and so I would be courting everybody right now. The dance isn't over yet.
Question back there?
Yeah. How do the CPMs compare for OTT versus
The question is, how do CPMs compare for OTT versus traditional linear programming? David?
They're quite high, in fact. Actually, yeah, they're quite high. And in fact, actually, it's funny. Even on the web, they're higher than what they're getting on TV.
Yeah,
And they're growing. And I mean, now with like Innovid and other companies like that, where we can have interactive ads on OTT, it's a game changer.
Yeah. So David Poltrak, who's the guru of all research at CBS for eons, is very bullish on video on demand because you can control the CPM and the user experience much more. And again, it comes down to that targeting sort of issue which we talked about. If you can actually reach the right audience, then you can drive a much better and provable CPM. Sorry.
David just referenced interactive ads, so I was curious more to that, but where do you see the future for advertisers? Where do they go other than sponsorships and B-roll?
Interactive ads, where do you go?
I'm not really following the question. I'm sorry. Interactive ads, there's two companies right now that we're dealing with that are building in SDKs into our platform for certain platforms. And so now with your remote control, for example, your Roku remote control, you're going to be able to stop an ad and really get into it and watch more of that ad. I think that's where advertisers are going to go. I mean, this is now they've got the consumer able to interact with their ads, to buy something immediately. Now, the next extension is going to be to the phone, because there's this dual screen mentality that's going on. So I'm going to have an ad, and Popcorn Flicks is going to be showing a movie, and an ad for soap is going to come up or whatever, or a car. And they're going to have that on their phone at the same time. And they're going to be able to do some kind of interaction on their phone with that ad while it's still playing up on their device, on the OTT device. And this is, I think, an advertiser's dream scenario. I don't think that it opens the door, the floodgates are open to a lot of different unique things and much higher CPMs.
And geo-based.
Oh, yeah, I mean, geo-based is there already now. I mean, it's amazing what I can do with the system we have in place.
Yep. Sorry, sir, over on the left.
In light of that, what does that mean, like direct to consumer or like buying clubs or membership clubs? How would that fit in with OTT? Because you talk about transactions on demand, video subscription, but where does like the QVCs or small OTT apps that are not doing that?
Yeah, so let me repeat the question. How does that relate to consumer fan clubs and things? So Overstock has just announced that they're, not just announced earlier this year, an OTT plan to basically use their vast audience, and not only their audience, but their fan club to basically produce an OTT sort of product. So, how do those things, Doug, do you have a view on that? So.
Well, I don't think that, I don't think it evolves away from the things that we see today. QVC, Home Shopping Network, all of those things were built on the back of specialized kind of programming, and I think we're just going to see more and more of those.
Any other? We're actually over time, but we were given permission to go a bit long. But if you want to go to lunch, then we should break soon. Back in the back, 2 more questions.
Yeah, so as we see sort of these massive revenues moving from right now what is essentially a one-way, one-to-many linear pipe into an environment which is
What other innovations are there in terms of monetization? I'm sort of generalizing the question, apologies. I'll just throw in DAI, dynamic ad insertion, which allows you to do programmatic ads at a personalized sort of level. But, other people?
I mean, I think it's a really fun time to be in TV because there's innovation up and down the food chain. I mean, everything from the business model that folks approach us with, not a week goes by where we don't see some new and slightly different configuration of how they're going to monetize. We've talked about the user experience, we've talked about bundling, we've talked about marketing. I mean, really, on our platform, well over 2,000 apps, we see innovation at every step of that process. And it's hard if you're building a new business to sort of put those pieces together. You'd be surprised the number of very senior people that approach our platform and say, well, should I do an ad-supported business model or a subscription business model? We're like, you need to decide that on your own. But here's what we know. We're able to advise in that regard. But these are complex pieces, all of which are moving at the same time.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Know your business, as Doug was sort of saying earlier, and Jeremy, and then experiment with these different sort of models and try and find something that works for you. One last question, if there is one. Okay, there isn't. Thanks, everybody. Hopefully that was useful.